The Peninsula-based Youth Challenge of Hampton Roads is providing restoration for those addicted to street drugs and opioids through prayer and faith. Details next. Welcome to Our Issues Hampton Roads. I'm your host, Ray Pearson-Benn. The street drug disaster has crippled the nation for decades. Meanwhile, the number of Americans being diagnosed with opioid addiction, along with the frightening number of yearly overdoses, has skyrocketed, leading the president to declare a national emergency. In our series coverage of the opioid crisis, we have presented the issue from the perspective of law enforcement, medical professionals, community task forces, as well as rehabilitation specialists. Today, we are looking at an alternative solution for our current drug epidemic. Here with me now is Pastor Travis Hall, Executive Director of Youth Challenge of Hampton Roads, an organization with a wheelhouse of programs that fight addiction with faith. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you for having me. It's great to be here.
Tell me, why is it that you have such a passion for transforming lives?
Gratitude. Having come out of addiction myself after an 18-year drug addiction, I'm just really thankful to be where I'm at today, and I think that's what really drives me to reach behind and help the guy or the girl that was once where I was.
So can you tell me how bad it got? How bad it got and how you came to Youth Challenge?
I had started using actually in high school. You know, I thought it was going to be innocent, just going to parties and drinking beer and smoking pot, hanging out. And, you know, but it took a hold of me, and it was something that I never could find my way out of totally. I had some seasons of I was actually pretty functional to some degree. I did some time in the military. I was actually a professional firefighter. Wow. And I had times where I exchanged the drugs for alcohol, but one way or the other I was medicating. And ultimately, after about 18 years, actually after about 15 years, I had started back messing around with cocaine. And I told myself at one point that I would never smoke crack. But one night ran out of powder cocaine and decided to try crack cocaine. Wow. And that really took a hold of me, and my life spiraled down pretty quickly. Lost everything that I had. And that's when I found Youth Challenge.
And you found Youth Challenge for yourself at that point.
Yes, well actually I was pretty fortunate because I kind of at some level always knew that God was going to be my help. And so I was sitting in a church one day, and Youth Challenge has always had groups that have gone out to different churches and have shared our story. And this team showed up at the church I happened to be in, kind of what I call a divine appointment. And because I never knew it existed until that day. And once I found out who they were and that I could find help there, I entered the program. That was 17 years ago.
Wow. So what do you think has led our nation to this recent boom in addiction and overdose?
You know, I think, you know, we've been in a drug crisis for well over 40 years, you know, but I think the recent boom really has kind of come from the belief that as long as it's a prescribed medication, that it's safe. If you look back at statistics back in the 60s with heroin use, about 80% of those that were opioid users began with heroin. And then once the 2000s came around, there was this huge paradigm shift, and 75% of opioid users began with a prescription painkiller. And whether it's someone who has an injury and is prescribed a medication, or it's a teenager raiding grandma's medicine cabinet, you know, once they try these substances and they become addicted, they're highly addictive, and then they're really in trouble.
So what are your thoughts on kicking a habit independently?
Very unlikely, especially in these situations. I personally, in my personal life, I had many attempts. You know, I never wanted to be a drug addict. I didn't want to be that person, but I never could find my own way out of it. I needed help.
And it was a great thing that Youth Challenge was there
Oh,
for
absolutely, absolutely, absolutely.
Now, what do you think that adding faith to the process of rehabilitation adds to the process?
You know, if you go back to the roots of recovery with Alcoholics Anonymous and the 12 Steps, the big book of Alcoholics Anonymous, which is a mainstay in a lot of recovery programs, states very clearly that it's a spiritual malady. And until we become well spiritually, we can't begin to become well mentally and emotionally, and even physically in some cases. So I believe it starts there. And I know that in my own life, it wasn't until that I learned that I couldn't control my own problem. I couldn't find my own way out of it, and I needed God to help me. My mom couldn't help me. My dad couldn't help me as bad as they wanted to. I needed God to come in and do something special in my heart, which thankfully He did.
So in your perspective, this is a total body healing?
Oh, absolutely.
Okay.
Absolutely.
Okay.
One of the things we do at Youth Challenge is treat the whole person. It's, you know, it's at its core, I believe that addiction is a spiritual issue, but there are also physical, mental, and emotional issues that need to be addressed in order for the person to become well.
So do you think that the government is doing enough in order to take back the control of this drug crisis?
You know, I think the government is doing what they can. You know, they've done a lot with regulations as far as controlling prescriptions so that addicts can't doctor shop and go to different doctors to get the same prescription over and over. But in a lot of cases, that's somewhat backfired because people are going to heroin more because the prescription pills run out and they're addicted and they need something.
And so what you're saying is once they kick that, or once the doctor is no longer giving them a script for the prescription drug, then they go back to the street drug.
Right.
Okay, so it's just popping back
once they're
and forth.
cut off, yes. Once they're cut off, once because it's regulated, you know, and the prescriptions can only be filled, you know, until it almost runs out and things like that. And I think those have been great moves in the right direction. You know, they've put in a lot of money now into methadone and Suboxone treatment, which you know, which can be effective when dealing with withdrawal, the physical aspects of withdrawal.
And what are those? Tell me about those.
They're alternative drugs, I guess, that they use, medications that they use to help ease the
to wean it off?
Kind of wean them off physically so that there's not the immediate physical danger of the withdrawal. But I believe that in the end, you know, it's a community problem. And there is such a shame factor that comes along with addiction that people stay in it longer. You know, they say they stay in it long than they really want to or intend to because they're ashamed to admit it, or a family member is ashamed to talk to somebody about having a son or a daughter who's a drug addict. And until the community recognizes that it's a community problem, you know, that stigma is removed, it's going to be hard to regain control, I think.
Yeah, we have more to talk about. Addiction is not limited to the addict. In many cases, it's a family affair. The role that the family plays in the recovery process when we return.